Feel free to check out my TeePublic after the video, and support me on Patreon. Watch till the end of the video for more. A couple years back, I made a video explaining the basement, or the White Room as it's normally called, from the live-action Attack on Titan movies. One thing I didn't really go over when talking about the significance of that set piece is how the origins of the Titans were finally revealed to Eren. Also forgot to mention that the White Room scene was inspired by The Matrix. And since nobody is making videos about these but me, I figured, why not? Though before I continue, I wish to remind you all that I will not be making references to the manga or an anime, with a few exceptions, as the live-action films are set in their own universe. Plus, the movies came up with the whole Titan origin twist first, because Hajime Isayama was involved in the creative process. But with that being said, on to the video. In the 2015 film Attack on Titan: End of the World, directed by Shinji Higuchi, after getting swept away by the armored Titan, Eren finds himself waking up in a strange white room. It isn't long until he sees his captain, Shikishima of the Survey Corps, and asks him what the hell's going on. Shikishima turns on a screen showing footage that eerily feels like something from the Manhattan Project. It's an experiment named the Falling Apple Project, where a man is being strapped to a set of restraints and begins to shake violently. And suddenly, an explosion occurs, and the man is now giant, as we hear thunderous applause from those viewing this experiment. Eren is shocked, in disbelief, as the harsh reality begins to settle within. The Titans were humans this entire time. There's a ton of news footage and video recordings of people turning into these giant behemoths that Eren sits through, trying to desperately wrap his head around what is happening. As Shikishima raises the question, were we trying to push the limits of our humanity or to weaponize ourselves? He mentions it is unknown, as the appearance of the Titans have thrown the world into chaos to the point where nations grow major distrust of one another, resulting in the Great Titan War, where all of humanity is pitted against one another, and ultimately reduces the world to a barren wasteland. However, with the dawn of a new era, a new power rises from the ashes. As we see in the films, the military police is in control of the rest of humanity. They decide how they should live and how they should die, using the fear of the Titans as a means to control the population, as well as going as far as to get rid of all remnants of the past they view as sinful, including books, gadgets, the whole nine, and even surveilling their citizens. Essentially, a dystopian Orwellian-esque authoritarian government. And within all this, mankind now lives within 3 concentric walls, and according to the final draft of the original script, they are Wall Sotono, the agricultural region, Wall Nakano, named after Toho special effects director Teruyoshi Nakano, the commercial region, and Wall Okuno, the government region. But at the very center, a large skyscraper known as the Tower of Babel, the military police's main base of operations. But we'll get back to the military police. You may be asking yourself, what caused all of this exactly? In the novelization Attack on Titan: End of the World, we finally learned the answer to Shikishima's question. It turns out, the creation of the Titans was not just meant to be the next step of human evolution or to weaponize ourselves, but to bring the world to its knees. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you, Jaeger and Wraith. Jaeger was a serum that could grant its user incredible power, the ability to transform into a rage-fueled giant that still possesses their humanity and intellect, made to push the boundaries of mankind. But the users could not stay in this Titan form for long, as the 2 bodies would eventually assimilate into one another. However, someone decided to create a less sophisticated version of Jaeger. On the other side of the coin, Wraith was an experimental bioweapon, which causes humans to cannibalize one another after growing to tremendous size, lacking all humanity, fear, and remorse. This bioweapon was tested on enemy nations as a top-secret experiment and was successful in completely destroying them as they were all driven to chaos and ate one another. However, there was an oversight. The Titans sought more prey, and while the creators were aware of the Titans' weak points, they began to multiply faster than they can be killed by modern weaponry, and as a result, the Titans would continue to run rampant. A March of the Giants, if you will, and thus initiated the Great Titan War, the downfall of humanity. May I remind you that this began with the Falling Apple Project? Apples being a symbol of temptation, sin, but more appropriately, the fall of man. 209 years have passed since the war, and a brilliant doctor by the name Grisha is one of few who possesses rich knowledge of the past. Dr. Grisha Jaeger then sought to recreate Jaeger. But while this was all going on, Grisha was the leader of a rebellious anti-government faction known as the Gauls, as they were aware of the corrupt authority and wrongdoing. However, Grisha and his wife Carla had two sons, Haku the older and Aaron the younger. One day, Haku disappears while Grisha is experimenting on Aaron and does the unthinkable. The little snitch reports his father to the government. As the government attempts to break into their basement, Grisha gets Garrison Officer Soda to hide Aaron, before the military police, with Director Kubal, destroys the Jaeger's treasure trove of remnants from a sinful past, and executes Grisha and Carla in their own home. As Soda and Aaron flee, Haku still nowhere to be found. And it is because of Jaeger that Aaron has the ability to transform into the Attack Titan, or Mysterious Titan according to the novelization. However, he is not alone. There is another Jaeger Titan with armored plating, and that power being held by Captain Shikishima, who just so happens to know about Grisha and the Gauls, and just so happened to grow up in the same town as Aaron, Monzen. While Grisha was experimenting on Aaron, he mentions that his brother did fine. Years later, Shikishima would lead a rebellion of his own, known as the Falcons, which are very similar to the Gauls. Could it be that Shikishima was Haku this entire time? Yes, it's obvious. Come to think of it, I should probably do a whole video dedicated to Shikishima just of how interesting of a character he is. But what of the Colossal Titan? That is clearly a Jaeger Titan that not only expresses intelligence, but control through its host, who happens to be Director Kubal. With this, we can deduce that Kubal had taken the Jaeger serum and experimented on himself, as a means for the government to have more power over their people. Yet there is another thread to all this. Who created Jaeger and Wraith to begin with? The novelization briefly explains a conflict where two countries went to war for Jaeger, which, judging by this footage, was developed in China, judging by the military uniforms. The country who claimed victory would keep the serum, which ended up being China. Should also mention that the novelization mentions another faction referred to as the ancestors of the Wall people, who helped this side create Jaeger. Now wait, doesn't the first Titan we see in the footage resemble a Wraith Titan? Well, if you have a good eye, it does appear that this particular Titan seems to be in control, judging by the way he looks around with what looks like a confused expression. During this, Shikishima questions if it was either to act as the next step of human evolution, or was it for weaponization. The novel basically makes it sound like Jaeger was meant to be both, if not more. Thus, this Titan is a Jaeger Titan, just not one with special attributes like the ones in the films. Which we can deduce that Grisha and Kubal discovered that it was possible to modify the serum to give the user special abilities like armored plating or superheated skin on top of being at a ginormous size. Another thing backing this up is that Aaron's Jaeger Titan form doesn't exactly have special abilities like the first Titan we see. It isn't until after Shikishima mentions the question is when he brings up that more Titans began appearing, which we can easily make the conclusion are Wraith Titans. But Shikishima in the novel mentions that someone from the defeated side decided to recreate Jaeger, but in a less sophisticated form, where the user loses all humanity and reasoning. And thanks to a blink and you'll miss it moment, we can see that it was the United States Department of Defense that was responsible for Wraith, who then used it on enemy territory. On top of MK Ultra and other secret experiments, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. But how do we tie all this into the Gargantua theory? The theory that the live-action Attack on Titan movies are sequels to Frankenstein Conquers the World and the War of the Gargantuas. Perhaps China researched the Frankenstein creature from 1965, as he was essentially a Titan who still demonstrated intelligence, reason, and most importantly, his humanity. He would then be split into two organisms, Gyra and Sanda, both still containing a sense of logic, making these creatures and Frankenstein the first Jaeger Titans. And you can bring up the fact that they can regenerate, like with Frankenstein's hand, Gyra has a habit of eating humans, and that they do not seem to have a form of getting rid of waste like pooping. Not to mention the whole modification aspect of Jaeger that we see in the Attack on Titan movies. And if we look at Gyra and Santa, we can see that these two are, by technicality, beast titans. Santa being a land creature, whereas Gyra is a sea creature. But hang on just a second, there happens to be another theory out there, and it is that the live-action Attack on Titan movies are actually sequels to the manga. Skip to the time code on screen to avoid being spoiled. I'll give y'all 5. The manga ends with humanity going to war with one another in the modern era, the world being reduced to nothingness as we see a small possibility that the Titans may return. The manga of Attack on Titan happens to be set during an alternate World War II-esque timeline, so perhaps Frankenstein from Frankenstein Conquers the World was a result of an experiment involving Zeke's spinal fluid injected into a heart and was then affected by nuclear radiation, causing it to form a completely new organism. Maybe the events of Frankenstein Conquers the World and the War of the Gargantuas occurred during this epilogue, making the live-action films a direct continuation. Well, as much as I want that to be true, it would be strange if the world was destroyed twice before the events of the live-action films. Let me explain. At the end of the manga, we see the world get destroyed, ending with a possibility that the prior events of the manga may repeat once more. The buildings here look very modern, and you don't see any Titans around, like in the live-action films. So in order for the movies to be canon, more time would need to pass for entire civilizations to rebuild themselves, which could take hundreds of years. Then we go into everything we just went over, but I doubt that happened. Maybe this was the Great Titan War from the movies being depicted, we just don't see the Titans. I feel like you can try and fill in the gaps, but there are just too many that it really comes off as being a stretch than anything. Like, it just gets too complicated. However, if you look at the original 2006 one-shot Attack on Titan Chapter 0, the Titans were the result of an experiment gone wrong, the characters are Japanese, and live in a dystopian future. So if there's one manga connection these movies have, it's that they're essentially an expansion of Chapter 0. So a quick recap, the events of the manga may or may not have happened. In 1960, Frankenstein, the first Jaeger Titan, appears, but is killed by a giant octopus. Frankenstein had split into 2 beast titans, Gyra and Santa, but are killed by an undersea volcanic eruption during their final battle. Decades later, in the modern era, China and the US go to war over the Jaeger serum. Developed in China, who wins? The US Department of Defense develops the Wraith bioweapon and drops it on opposing nations. The bioweapon successfully causes nations to collapse by transforming citizens into Titans. The bioweapon gets out of hand and causes the Great Titan War. The world is destroyed, and after 2 centuries, the rest of humanity lives within 3 walls controlled by the military police. Dr. Grisha Jaeger recreates the Jaeger serum in experiments on his children. Dr. Jaeger is reported and executed as military police director Kubal confiscates the Jaeger serum. Years later, the Colossal Titan appears, inherited by Kubal, who destroys Wal Sultano. Eren later emerges as the Attack Titan, and the Armor Titan, or White Titan according to the novel, appears, later revealed as Captain Shikishima. And this is totally an expansion to Chapter 0. So there you have the origins of the Titans. Hope this cleared up some things here and there, and if you like what you see, then definitely consider supporting me on Patreon, where for a single $1, your name can appear at the end of every future upload. Other than that, you can also get early access to videos, exclusive content, commissioned video requests, and receive a t-shirt of your choice from my TeePublic. Also want to give a very special thanks to the Kaiju X on Twitter for helping out with some of the information in this video. Once I reach enough patrons, I'll do a video covering several unmade Godzilla films, so if that's something you'd like to see, then go support me on Patreon. Feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and this is TitanGoji, signing off.